The shopping mall buzzed with the frantic energy of Christmas Eve, a symphony of crying children, holiday music, and the relentless chatter of last-minute shoppers hunting for gifts they should have bought weeks ago. Daniel Foster stood by the fountain in the center court, watching his daughter Lily press her nose against the glass of a toy store window. Her breath fogged the surface as she traced her finger along the outline of a dollhouse she'd been talking about for months, the one with the working lights and tiny furniture that cost more than Daniel made in a week. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He checked his phone. 4:30 in the afternoon. His shift at the warehouse started at midnight, which gave him just enough time to take Lily home, make her dinner, wait for his neighbor Mrs. Patterson to come sit with her, and drive across town in his beat-up Honda that made a grinding noise every time he shifted gears. The car needed work. Everything needed work. But there was never enough money, never enough time, never enough of anything except exhaustion and the growing weight of trying to be both mother and father to a little girl who deserved so much more than he could give her. Daniel worked nights loading trucks at a distribution center on the industrial side of town. The pay was minimum wage, the work was backbreaking, and his supervisor was the kind of man who enjoyed reminding everyone beneath him exactly how replaceable they were. But it was steady, and steady meant Lily had a roof over her head and food in her stomach, even if Daniel himself ate cereal for dinner most nights and wore the same 3 shirts in rotation because buying new clothes felt like an impossible luxury. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the grease that had accumulated from skipping his morning shower because Lily needed help with her school project and there simply wasn't time for both. His jeans had a patch on the knee that his mother had sewn on before she passed away 2 years ago. His jacket was older than his daughter. He looked, he knew, like exactly what he was. A man barely keeping his head above water, one missed paycheck away from disaster. Lily turned away from the window, her dark eyes bright with the kind of hope that made Daniel's chest ache. She didn't ask for the dollhouse. She never asked for anything, not since the divorce, not since her mother left. It was like she understood, on some deep level that no 7-year-old should have to understand, that asking for things only made her father's face crumple with guilt he tried desperately to hide. "Can we look at the bookstore, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice small and careful. Books were cheaper than toys. She'd figured that out somehow, worked out the math of their life in the way children do when they're forced to grow up too fast. "Sure, sweetheart," Daniel said, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold despite her mittens, and he made a mental note to check if she'd outgrown her winter coat. Probably. She was always outgrowing things. They walked through the mall, past stores glittering with merchandise that existed in a different universe from the one Daniel inhabited. Designer clothes, electronics, jewelry that cost more than his monthly rent. The other shoppers moved around them like water around stones, well-dressed families with shopping bags from expensive stores, couples holding hands and laughing, teenagers in groups chattering about parties and gifts and plans that involved the kind of careless freedom that came from not having to worry about every single dollar. Daniel felt invisible. That was fine. He'd gotten used to being invisible. The world didn't see men like him, men in shabby clothes with worn-out shoes and the permanent slouch that came from working nights and raising a kid alone. He was part of the background, the help, the kind of person you looked past on your way to somewhere better. They were halfway to the bookstore when Daniel saw her. Jessica. His ex-wife stood near the entrance to a high-end boutique, laughing at something the man beside her had said. The man was tall, confident, wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Daniel's entire wardrobe. His watch caught the light, gleaming gold. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He had his arm around Jessica's waist in a casual, possessive way that made Daniel's stomach twist. Jessica looked different. Her hair was styled in soft waves, professionally done. Her makeup was flawless. She wore a cream-colored coat that looked like it belonged in a fashion magazine, and her boots had those distinctive red soles that Daniel knew, from overhearing conversations at work, meant they cost over $1,000. She carried shopping bags from stores Daniel had only seen in commercials, the kind with names he couldn't pronounce. She looked happy. Radiant. Like she'd stepped into the life she'd always wanted, the one she couldn't have with Daniel. Lily's hand tightened in his. She'd seen her mother too. Daniel's first instinct was to turn around, to pull Lily away before Jessica noticed them, to avoid the inevitable awkwardness and pain of a confrontation he wasn't prepared for. But Lily had frozen in place, staring at her mother with an expression that broke Daniel's heart into smaller and smaller pieces. It was hunger. Raw, desperate hunger for the woman who'd walked out of her life 18 months ago. Jessica had left the day after Lily's 6th birthday. No warning, no discussion, just a letter on the kitchen table explaining that she'd made a mistake, that she'd married too young, that she wanted more from life than struggling in a tiny apartment with a husband who worked nights and came home smelling like cardboard and sweat. She said she still cared about Lily, that she'd stay in touch, that this wasn't goodbye. But it had been goodbye. The calls came less and less frequently. The promised visits never materialized. Child support payments arrived sporadically, usually late, sometimes not at all. Jessica had moved on, moved up, found the life she wanted with someone who could give her the things Daniel never could. And now here she was, 10 feet away, laughing with her new boyfriend in the same mall where Daniel was trying to figure out if he could afford to buy his daughter a single book without cutting into the grocery budget. Before Daniel could decide what to do, Jessica's eyes swept across the crowd and landed on them. Her expression shifted, surprise flickering across her face, followed by something that might have been discomfort or guilt or annoyance. It was hard to tell. She said something to the man beside her, who glanced over at Daniel and Lily with the kind of casual curiosity you might give to strangers on the street. Jessica approached them, her boyfriend trailing behind. Her smile was bright and tight, the kind of smile you gave to acquaintances you ran into unexpectedly and didn't particularly want to talk to. "Daniel," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of forced pleasantness. "What a surprise." "Jessica," Daniel replied. His throat felt tight. Lily pressed against his leg, half hiding behind him. Jessica's gaze dropped to their daughter. "Hi, sweetie. Look how much you've grown." Lily said nothing. She stared at her mother with huge eyes, her small body rigid with tension. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The boyfriend extended his hand to Daniel with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Richard Hartley," he said. His grip was firm, his smile professional. "I've heard a lot about you." Daniel doubted that very much, but he shook the offered hand anyway. "Daniel Foster. Richard is a senior partner at Hartley & Associates," Jessica said, her voice carrying a note of pride that felt like a knife. "Corporate law. We met at a fundraiser last year." Of course they did. Fundraisers. Corporate law. A different universe entirely. "That's great," Daniel said, because what else was there to say? "Congratulations on trading up. I'm happy you found someone who can afford to take you to fundraisers while I'm trying to figure out how to fix my car's transmission." An awkward silence settled over them, broken only by the tinny sound of jingle bells playing over the mall's speakers. Other shoppers flowed around them, oblivious to the small tragedy unfolding by the fountain. Jessica shifted her shopping bags from one hand to the other. "So, what brings you here? Last-minute shopping?" "Just browsing," Daniel said. He didn't mention that browsing was all he could afford to do, that they were here because Lily had asked so sweetly if they could just look at the decorations, and Daniel couldn't say no to his daughter even though every minute in this mall reminded him of everything he couldn't provide. Richard checked his watch, a casual gesture that somehow managed to draw attention to the expensive timepiece. "We should probably get going, Jess. Reservations at 6. "Right," Jessica said. She looked down at Lily again, her expression softening slightly. "It was good to see you, sweetheart. Maybe we can arrange a visit sometime soon." They both knew it wouldn't happen. The words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. Jessica started to turn away, Richard's hand finding the small of her back, already guiding her toward the exit and whatever expensive restaurant awaited them. They'd made it perhaps 3 steps when Lily's voice cut through the noise of the mall, small but clear and devastating in its simplicity. "Merry Christmas, Mommy." 2 words. That was all. "Merry Christmas, Mommy." Said with such pure, uncomplicated hope, such desperate love, such willingness to forgive everything if only her mother would turn around and see her, really see her. Jessica froze. Her shoulders stiffened. For a long moment she stood perfectly still, her back to them, her expression hidden. Richard looked confused, glancing between Jessica and the small girl whose words had somehow changed the temperature of the entire interaction. The mall continued its chaotic dance around them, oblivious. Shoppers pushed past. Children shrieked with excitement. Cash registers chimed. But in that small circle by the fountain, time had stopped, held suspended by 2 words from a 7-year-old girl who just wanted her mother to love her. Jessica turned around slowly. Her face had changed. The professional smile was gone, replaced by something raw and uncomfortable. Guilt, maybe. Shame. Recognition of what she'd become, what she'd left behind, what those 2 simple words represented. She looked at Lily, really looked at her this time, and seemed to see for the first time the worn coat that was slightly too small, the scuffed shoes, the way the little girl clutched her father's hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that had proven itself unreliable. She saw Daniel too, saw him properly, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the patch on his jeans, the way he stood like a man bracing for another blow because he'd taken so many already. "Lily," Jessica said, and her voice cracked slightly on the name. Richard touched her elbow. "Jess, we're going to be late." But Jessica didn't move. She stood there, her expensive shopping bags hanging from her manicured hands, her perfect makeup starting to run slightly as her eyes welled with tears she blinked rapidly to contain. The contrast was striking. The woman who had everything, whose life looked like something from a catalog, confronted by the daughter she'd abandoned and the man she'd left behind. People were starting to stare. A few slowed their walking, sensing drama, that particular human instinct that draws crowds to accidents and arguments. Daniel felt their eyes, felt the judgment, felt the familiar burn of shame that came from being the spectacle, the public display of failure that others could watch and feel grateful wasn't their own life. He wanted to leave. Wanted to scoop Lily up and walk away with whatever dignity he had left. But Lily hadn't moved, hadn't released her grip on his hand, was still staring at her mother with those huge, hopeful eyes that believed, despite everything, that people could change, that love could win, that mommies came back. "I should have called more," Jessica said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have visited. I should have." She trailed off, words failing in the face of 18 months of absence, of missed birthdays and holidays and bedtimes, of calls that never came and promises that dissolved like sugar and rain. "We're doing fine," Daniel said, though they both knew it was a lie. He wasn't trying to make her feel better. He was trying to protect Lily from seeing her mother's guilt, from carrying the burden of her mother's regret. Richard cleared his throat, the sound sharp and impatient in the artificial warmth of the mall. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he pulled it out, glancing at the screen with the kind of irritation that came from having his schedule disrupted by something as inconvenient as human emotion. "Jessica, seriously. The reservation." But Jessica wasn't listening to him anymore. She was staring at Lily, at the worn pink backpack shaped like a bunny that hung from the child's shoulders, at the homemade bracelet of colored yarn wrapped around her thin wrist. Details that told a story Jessica had been working very hard not to read. "How is school?" Jessica asked, and the question came out awkward, stilted, like she was talking to a stranger's child instead of her own daughter. Lily looked up at Daniel, seeking permission or guidance or maybe just reassurance that it was okay to answer. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, and she turned back to her mother. "Good," Lily said quietly. "I got an A on my book report." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You always were such a smart girl." Jessica's voice wavered. She blinked rapidly, and a single tear escaped, cutting a dark line through her foundation. She wiped it away quickly, glancing at Richard as if embarrassed to show weakness in front of him. The mall crowd continued to surge around them, a river of humanity focused on gifts and sales and the rapidly approaching deadline of Christmas morning. Someone jostled Daniel's shoulder in passing, muttering an apology without slowing down. The collision reminded him sharply of where they were, of how exposed they stood in this public space, their private pain on display for anyone who cared to look. A security guard walked past, his radio crackling with chatter about a lost child on the second floor. The fountain behind them gurgled and splashed, coins glinting at the bottom where people had thrown wishes that probably never came true. Daniel wondered how many of those wishes were from people like him, people who threw pennies into water and hoped for miracles because they couldn't afford anything else. "Listen," Jessica said, and her voice had changed, become more businesslike, like she was trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond her comfort zone. "Maybe we could arrange something. A proper visit. Dinner, perhaps. I could pick Lily up next weekend, take her somewhere nice." The offer hung in the air, and Daniel felt Lily's entire body tense with hope. He looked down at his daughter's face and saw the desperate want there, the willingness to believe that this time would be different, that her mother meant it. But Daniel had heard promises before. He'd heard them in the early days after Jessica left, when she'd sworn she just needed space, just needed time to figure things out, when she'd promised she'd always be there for Lily even if she couldn't be there for him. He'd heard them in the sporadic phone calls that came every few weeks, the assurances that she'd visit soon, that she hadn't forgotten, that she still loved her daughter even if she'd stopped loving her husband. Empty words. All of them. Pretty sounds that dissolved in daylight. "Sure," Daniel said, because what else could he say with Lily standing right there, with hope radiating from her small body like heat from a fire? That would be nice. Jessica's relief was palpable. She'd been given an out, a way to make this encounter less painful, to walk away feeling like she'd done something good, something motherly. She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "Give me your number. I'll text you. We can coordinate." Daniel recited his number, the same one he'd had for 5 years, the one Jessica used to have saved in her phone under a heart emoji before she'd presumably deleted it along with everything else from their life together. He watched her type it in, watched her send a quick test message that made his phone buzz in his pocket. Proof of connection. Evidence that this time, maybe, things would be different. "Perfect," Jessica said, slipping her phone back into her expensive purse. "I'll be in touch." Richard shifted his weight, his patience clearly exhausted. "We really do need to go." "Yes, of course." Jessica looked at Lily one more time, and something complicated crossed her face. Regret, maybe. Or sadness. Or just the uncomfortable awareness that she'd become the villain in her own daughter's story, the mother who left, the woman who chose designer handbags over bedtime stories. She bent down, her coat rustling with the movement, and for a moment Daniel thought she might hug Lily. But she stopped short, settling for a pat on the head that was more awkward than affectionate. "Be good for your dad, okay?" Lily nodded, mute again, her brief spark of hope dimming as she realized this encounter was ending, that her mother was leaving again, walking away with the tall man in the expensive coat toward a life that had no room for worn-out apartments and single fathers struggling to make rent. Jessica straightened, gave Daniel a tight smile, and turned away. Richard's hand found her back again, proprietary and guiding, and they moved toward the exit with the easy grace of people who belonged in nice places, who fit seamlessly into a world of reservations and fundraisers and watches that cost more than cars. Daniel watched them go, watched Jessica's cream-colored coat disappear into the crowd, watched the last glimpse of her perfectly styled hair vanish around a corner. Beside him, Lily stood very still, her hand limp in his, her gaze fixed on the spot where her mother had been. The mall's cheerful chaos felt suddenly oppressive. The Christmas music that had been pleasant background noise now seemed shrill and mocking. Jingle bells and silver bells and bells on cocktails, celebrating a holiday that felt more like an endurance test than a celebration. "Come on, sweetheart," Daniel said softly. Let's go look at those books. But Lily didn't move. She stood rooted to the polished floor, her small chest rising and falling with breaths that came too quick, too shallow. Daniel knew that rhythm. He'd seen it before, in the weeks after Jessica left, when Lily would wake up crying in the middle of the night, hyperventilating from nightmares about being abandoned. Lily? He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. Hey! Look at me! She turned her head slowly, and the expression on her face gutted him. It was the look of someone who'd been promised something beautiful and had it snatched away at the last second. Again. Always again. She's not coming, is she? Lily's voice was tiny, barely audible over the mall noise. She's not going to visit. Daniel wanted to lie. Wanted to tell his daughter that of course her mother would visit, that Jessica meant what she said, that next weekend would come and bring with it the magical reunion Lily had been dreaming about for 18 months. But he couldn't do it. Couldn't build up hope that would only shatter, couldn't set his daughter up for another disappointment just to make this moment easier. I don't know, baby, he said instead, and hated himself for the honesty. I hope so. But I don't know. Lily's bottom lip trembled. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over, running down her cheeks in hot tracks that she scrubbed away with her mittened hands. Why doesn't she love me anymore? The question broke something in Daniel's chest, some last protected piece of his heart that he'd been trying to keep intact. He pulled Lily into his arms, holding her tight while she cried into his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs she'd been holding back since the moment she saw her mother across the mall. People walked past them, some glancing with brief curiosity or sympathy before moving on with their own busy lives. An elderly woman paused, concern creasing her weathered face, but Daniel shook his head slightly and she nodded in understanding, continuing on her way. Private grief, even in public spaces, demanded some measure of respect. She does love you, Daniel said, the words muffled against Lily's hair. She just doesn't know how to show it right now. That's not your fault. That's never your fault. Then why did she leave? How do you explain adult failure to a child? How do you make a 7-year-old understand that sometimes people choose the wrong things, that they chase versions of happiness that leave wreckage in their wake, that love isn't always enough to make someone stay? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Daniel said. Big ones. Your mom thought she wanted a different life, and she made choices that hurt us. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. You're perfect, Lily. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Lily pulled back slightly, her face red and blotchy from crying. Really? Really? The very best thing. Daniel wiped her tears with his thumb, trying to repair the damage Jessica had done with 2 minutes of careless interaction. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. I'm always here. I know, Daddy. Lily sniffled, rubbing her eyes. I'm sorry I'm crying. Don't be sorry. Crying is okay. Crying is healthy. He pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket, grateful that he'd grabbed it from the food court earlier. Here. Blow your nose. She did, a wet honking sound that made her giggle despite her tears. It was a small sound, fragile as glass, but it was something. A crack in the darkness. Can we still look at books? Lily asked. Absolutely. Daniel stood, taking her hand again. Come on. Let's find you something good. They walked through the mall toward the bookstore, and with each step Daniel felt the weight of the encounter settling onto his shoulders like snow accumulation, heavy and cold. He'd see Jessica again, probably. She lived in the same city, moved in circles that occasionally intersected with the edges of Daniel's world. And each time would be like this, awkward and painful, a reminder of everything that had fallen apart. But more than his own discomfort, he worried about Lily. Worried about the hope that flickered in her every time Jessica made a promise, and the crushing disappointment when those promises evaporated. How many times could a child's heart break before it stopped trying to heal? The bookstore was quieter than the main mall, insulated by walls of paper and ink. The smell of new books mixed with the cinnamon scent from a candle burning on the checkout counter. Lily's grip on his hand loosened as they entered, her attention immediately drawn to the children's section with its bright covers and inviting displays. She drifted toward the picture books, running her fingers along the spines, reading titles in a whisper to herself. Daniel followed, letting her explore, grateful for this small space where the world felt manageable, where happiness could be found in illustrated pages and stories with happy endings. A young employee approached, college-aged with dyed blue hair and a name tag that read Emma. "Can I help you find anything?" "Just browsing, thanks," Daniel said. Emma nodded and moved away, but not before her gaze flickered over Daniel's worn clothes with an expression he couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe. Or judgment. It was hard to tell anymore. He'd stopped trying to parse the look strangers gave him. Lily pulled a book from the shelf, a hardcover with a dragon on the front. "Can I read this one?" "Of course." Daniel settled into one of the small chairs meant for children, his knees awkwardly high, and Lily climbed into his lap with the practiced ease of routine. This was their ritual, had been since she was tiny. Reading together in bookstores they couldn't afford to buy from, living vicariously through characters who had adventures and magic and parents who stayed. Lily opened the book and began to read aloud, her voice gaining strength as she moved through the story. She was a good reader, better than most kids her age. Reading had become her escape, her way of traveling to worlds where mothers didn't leave and fathers didn't work themselves to exhaustion. Daniel listened, his chin resting on top of her head, feeling the vibration of her voice through his chest. This, he thought. This is what matters. Not expensive coats or fancy restaurants or watches that gleam gold. This moment, his daughter in his lap, reading about dragons and brave knights, safe and warm and loved. The story reached its climax, the dragon defeated, the kingdom saved. Lily closed the book with a satisfied sigh and looked up at him. That was good. It was, Daniel agreed. You read that really well. Can we get it? Daniel glanced at the price sticker. $24.95. He had $37 in his checking account until Friday's paycheck deposited. Lily needed new shoes. The electric bill was due. The car needed that transmission work he'd been putting off. But it was Christmas Eve, and his daughter had just been rejected by her mother in a crowded mall, and sometimes being a good father meant making terrible financial decisions. Yeah, he said. We can get it. Lily's face lit up with pure joy, the kind of unfiltered happiness that made every struggle worth it. She hugged the book to her chest like treasure, bouncing slightly with excitement. Really? Really? Merry Christmas, sweetheart. They walked to the counter, Lily clutching her book, Daniel pulling his wallet from his back pocket with the grim determination of a man about to make his bank account cry. The wallet was leather, a gift from Jessica on their second anniversary, back when they were young and stupid and thought love conquered all. It was falling apart now, the stitching coming loose, the leather cracked and worn. Emma rang up the purchase, her fingers flying over the register. That'll be $26.73 with tax. Daniel handed over his debit card, hoping the transaction would go through, that he hadn't miscalculated, that there was enough in there to cover it. The card reader beeped. Processing. Please wait. His heart thudded uncomfortably. Approved. Relief washed through him, sharp and immediate. Emma bagged the book in a paper bag with the store's logo, handed it to Lily with a smile. Enjoy your book, sweetie. Thank you, Lily said, beaming. They left the bookstore and stepped back into the mall's chaos. The crowds had thinned slightly as closing time approached, but the energy remained frantic, desperate people making last desperate purchases. Daniel checked his phone. 5:45. He needed to get Lily home, needed to make dinner, needed to wait for Mrs. Patterson who was always 10 minutes late but never failed to show up. They walked toward the exit, past stores preparing to close, past exhausted retail workers counting down the minutes until freedom. The cold hit them as they pushed through the doors, December air sharp and biting, carrying the promise of snow that the weather report said would start falling around midnight. Daniel's car sat in the far corner of the parking lot, right where he'd left it 3 hours ago. He'd parked far away because the closer spots cost money in this mall, $2 an hour, and free parking was worth the walk. The Honda looked even more pathetic out here, surrounded by newer vehicles, SUVs and sedans that didn't sound like dying animals when they started. Lily climbed into her booster seat, buckling herself in with practiced efficiency. Daniel slid behind the wheel, turned the key, and listened to the engine groan and sputter before finally catching. The grinding noise was worse. Definitely worse. He was going to have to deal with that soon, find money somewhere, somehow. He pulled out of the parking lot, joining the stream of traffic heading away from the mall. The streets were decorated with lights, houses wrapped in strings of color, inflatable Santas, and reindeer dotting lawns. Christmas was everywhere, inescapable, a celebration he couldn't afford to fully participate in but couldn't avoid either. "Daddy?" Lily's voice came from the back seat, small and uncertain. "Yeah, baby? Do you think Mom will really call?" Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The honest answer was no. The kind answer was maybe. The answer he gave was somewhere in between. "I don't know, Lily. But whether she does or doesn't, you've got me. Always. I know." A pause. "I'm glad I have you." Something in Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm glad I have you too, sweetheart. You're my whole world." They drove in silence for a while, the radio playing quiet Christmas songs, the heater struggling to warm the car's interior. Daniel thought about Jessica, about Richard, about the life his ex-wife had built in his absence. He thought about the choices people made, about the paths that diverged and never reconnected, about the casualties left behind when someone decided they wanted more. But mostly he thought about the little girl in the back seat, clutching her new book, who'd said "Merry Christmas, Mommy" with such pure hope that it had stopped time. 2 words that had exposed every crack in Jessica's new perfect life, that had reminded her of what she'd abandoned, that had changed something Daniel couldn't quite name yet. 2 words that might, in some way he didn't yet understand, change everything. The apartment building where Daniel and Lily lived sat on the eastern edge of town, a squat brick structure that had been old when Daniel was born and had only gotten older. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds pushing through, and the stairs leading to their second-floor unit creaked under his weight like they were complaining about having to bear one more burden. The hallway smelled like old carpet and the competing dinners of a dozen families, spices and grease and the unmistakable scent of poverty trying to make itself comfortable. Daniel unlocked their door, the deadbolt sticking like it always did, requiring just the right amount of jiggling to convince it to cooperate. The apartment wasn't much. A tiny living room that bled into an even tinier kitchen, 1 bathroom with a toilet that ran unless you jiggled the handle, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for beds. The walls were thin enough that they could hear Mrs. Chen next door watching her game shows, the enthusiastic shouts of contestants winning prizes that probably wouldn't change their lives much. But it was home. The space heater in the corner hummed with effort, trying to push warmth into rooms that seemed determined to stay cold. Lily's drawings covered the refrigerator, held in place by magnets Daniel had collected from various pizza places over the years. The couch was second-hand, purchased from a thrift store, with cushions that sagged in the middle. The coffee table was scratched and wobbled on an uneven leg that Daniel kept meaning to fix but never had time for. Lily dropped her backpack by the door and carried her new book to the couch, curling up with it like it was a living thing that needed comfort. Daniel watched her for a moment, his daughter's dark hair falling across her face as she bent over the pages, already lost in a world of dragons and adventures. She looked so much like her mother in profile, the same delicate bone structure, the same way of tilting her head when she concentrated. It hurt sometimes, seeing Jessica's ghost in his daughter's features. He moved to the kitchen, opening the refrigerator to assess their options. A carton of eggs, mostly full. Some wilted lettuce. A half loaf of bread. Peanut butter. A container of leftover rice from 3 days ago that was probably still safe to eat. The freezer held a bag of frozen vegetables and 2 chicken breasts he'd been saving for a special occasion. Christmas Eve qualified, he supposed. Daniel pulled out the chicken, setting it in the sink to thaw while he started water boiling for the rice. Cooking was one of the skills he'd had to learn fast after Jessica left. Before that, she'd handled most of the meals, and Daniel had been content to let her, coming home exhausted from work to find dinner waiting. Now he was both cook and provider, and his repertoire consisted mostly of variations on rice, pasta, and whatever protein he could afford that week. The kitchen window looked out over the parking lot and beyond it, the sprawl of the city. Lights were beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness, Christmas decorations transforming the urban landscape into something almost magical if you squinted and ignored the broken streetlights and chain-link fences. Somewhere out there, Jessica was sitting in a nice restaurant with Richard, probably ordering wine that cost more than Daniel's weekly grocery budget, probably not thinking about the little girl who'd looked at her with such desperate hope. The water reached a boil and Daniel added rice, measuring by eye because their measuring cups had disappeared months ago and he'd never gotten around to replacing them. He seasoned the chicken with salt and pepper and the last sprinkle of garlic powder from a container that was mostly air now, then set it in the oven to bake. 30 minutes, maybe 40. Enough time to sit with Lily, to check on her emotional state, to do the parenting that mattered more than food. He walked back to the living room and settled onto the couch beside his daughter. She'd made progress on her book, already a quarter of the way through, her lips moving slightly as she read the more difficult words. Daniel loved watching her read, loved seeing her mind work, solving puzzles of language and meaning. She was smart, smarter than he'd been at her age, and he was determined to nurture that intelligence even if he couldn't afford private schools or tutors or any of the advantages kids like her deserved. "Good book?" he asked. Lily nodded without looking up. "The dragon isn't really bad. He's just lonely." "Aren't they all?" Daniel muttered, then caught himself. "Not appropriate. Don't project adult cynicism onto children's stories. That's an interesting twist. The knight is trying to help him find his family." Lily turned a page, her finger tracing the illustration of a massive dragon with sad eyes. "Sometimes people think you're scary when you're just sad." Daniel felt that observation land somewhere deep in his chest. His 7-year-old daughter, unconsciously articulating truths that most adults spent lifetimes failing to understand. "That's very wise, sweetheart. It's just what the book says." But she smiled, pleased with the compliment. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the turning of pages and the hum of the space heater and the distant noise of the city beyond their walls. Daniel let his head fall back against the couch, exhaustion creeping in now that the adrenaline of the mall encounter had faded. His body ached in the specific way it did after too many 12-hour shifts, a deep bone tiredness that sleep never quite fixed. His phone buzzed in his pocket, startling him. He pulled it out, saw an unknown number on the screen. For a brief, irrational moment, he thought it might be Jessica, that she'd actually meant what she said about staying in touch. But the message was from his supervisor at the warehouse. "Need you to come in early tonight. Mike called out sick. Can you start at 10 instead of midnight?" Daniel stared at the message, feeling something inside him sink. Early meant leaving Lily sooner. Early meant less sleep tomorrow. Early meant arriving at work already exhausted instead of merely tired. But early also meant extra hours, and extra hours meant extra money, and extra money meant maybe he could fix the car's transmission before it completely died. He typed back a response. "Sure. I'll be there." The reply came immediately. "Good man. See you at 10. Good man." As if agreeing to sacrifice more of his life made him virtuous. As if he had any choice. Daniel pocketed his phone and checked the time. 6:15. Mrs. Patterson would arrive around 7:30, which gave him just enough time to feed Lily, make sure she brushed her teeth, maybe read her another chapter of the book they'd been working through together before bed. The new dragon book would have to wait for tomorrow, when he got home from his shift and crawled into bed beside her for a few hours of sleep before she woke up excited about Christmas morning. Christmas morning. Daniel had hidden her presents in the back of his closet, wrapped in newspaper comics because he couldn't afford wrapping paper. A used bicycle he'd found on Craigslist for $30, repainted pink with spray paint from the dollar store. A puzzle. Some colored pencils and a sketchbook. Not much, but it was what he could manage. He'd told Lily that Santa was real but struggling this year, that the economy was tough even at the North Pole, and she'd nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who'd learned too young that magic had limits. The oven timer dinged, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. He stood, his knees cracking in a way that made him feel older than 32, and returned to the kitchen. The chicken was done, golden brown and fragrant. He plated it alongside rice and microwaved vegetables, the meal looking better than he'd expected. Not restaurant quality, not what Lily would get if her mother decided to actually follow through on that dinner promise, but decent. Nutritious. Made with love, which had to count for something. "Dinner's ready, Lil," he called. She appeared moments later, climbing onto one of the two mismatched chairs at their small table. Daniel had found the chairs on the curb outside someone's house, a small miracle of timing and necessity. One was wooden with a cracked seat, the other metal with rust spots he'd tried to sand away. Lily always chose the wooden one because it didn't get cold like metal did. They ate in the warm quiet that came from being comfortable with each other. Lily told him more about the dragon book, about the knight's journey, about the princess who turned out to be smarter than everyone thought. Daniel listened, making appropriate sounds of interest, asking questions that made Lily think deeper about the story. This was parenting at its purest, he thought. Not the big moments or grand gestures, but the small daily rituals of feeding and listening and being present. "This is really good, Daddy," Lily said, spearing a piece of chicken with her fork. "Thanks, baby. I'm glad you like it. Will we have Christmas dinner tomorrow? Like the kind on TV?" Daniel thought about his fridge, about the $7 left in his account after buying the book, about the fact that payday wasn't until Friday. "We'll have something nice," he said carefully. "Maybe not a turkey, but something good. We'll make it special." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer. She'd learned not to push, not to demand, to take what was offered with gratitude instead of asking for more. It was a skill Daniel wished she didn't have to develop, this early understanding of scarcity and limitation. They finished eating and Daniel washed the dishes by hand because their dishwasher had broken 6 months ago and the landlord kept promising to fix it but never did. Lily dried, standing on a step stool to reach the counter, humming a Christmas carol she'd learned in school. The melody was slightly off-key but earnest, and Daniel found himself humming along, their voices blending in the small kitchen. By 7 o'clock, Lily was in her pajamas, teeth brushed, ready for bed even though bedtime wasn't for another hour. But Daniel needed her settled before Mrs. Patterson arrived, needed the transition to be smooth so he could leave for work without guilt eating him alive. He tucked her into bed, pulling the comforter up to her chin. The heater in her room worked better than the one in the living room, a small mercy he was grateful for every winter night. "Will you read to me?" Lily asked, her voice already drowsy. "Of course." Daniel picked up their current book, a fantasy novel about a girl who discovered she had magic. They were halfway through, right at the part where the protagonist was learning to control her powers. He opened to their bookmarked page and began to read, his voice falling into the rhythm of narration, bringing the story to life. Lily's eyes grew heavier with each page. By the 3rd chapter, her breathing had deepened, her body relaxed into sleep. Daniel set the book aside and sat for a moment, watching his daughter dream. In sleep, she looked younger, the worry lines that sometimes creased her forehead smoothed away. She looked like a child should look, innocent and untroubled, unburdened by adult complications like absent mothers and struggling fathers. He kissed her forehead gently, whispering words she couldn't hear. "I love you more than anything in this world. I'm sorry I can't give you more. I'm sorry your mom left. I'm sorry for all of it. But I promise I'll never stop trying. I promise I'll never leave." A knock at the door pulled him away from Lily's bedside. "Mrs. Patterson, right on schedule." Daniel closed Lily's door quietly and went to let in their neighbor. Mrs. Patterson was 73 years old, widowed for a decade, with steel-gray hair she kept in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been watching Lily since Daniel started night shifts, refusing payment beyond the occasional grocery run or help with something her arthritis made difficult. She said she liked the company, that the apartment got too quiet at night, but Daniel suspected she was just kind in a way people didn't seem to be anymore. "Evening, Daniel," she said, stepping inside with a canvas bag over her shoulder. "How's our girl tonight? Already asleep? Long day." Daniel grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, his work boots from the floor. "I have to be in at 10 instead of midnight. Mike's sick." Mrs. Patterson made a disapproving sound. "They work you too hard." "It's fine. I appreciate you coming on short notice." "Nonsense. Where else would I be?" She settled into the sagging couch, pulling her knitting from the bag. "You go on. We'll be fine." Daniel hesitated at the door, that familiar reluctance to leave warring with the necessity of work. "There's leftover chicken in the fridge if you get hungry. And if Lily wakes up, she might ask about her mom. We ran into Jessica at the mall today." Mrs. Patterson's needles paused mid-stitch. "Did you now?" "It wasn't great. Lily's processing it." Daniel didn't elaborate. Mrs. Patterson knew the history, had held Lily through crying fits in the early days after Jessica left. She understood. "I'll take care of her if she wakes. You be careful driving that death trap of yours." Daniel managed a smile. "It's not that bad. It sounds like a cement mixer full of gravel. Get it fixed before it strands you somewhere." "Working on it." He pulled on his jacket, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. "I'll be back around 8:30 tomorrow morning. Christmas breakfast before she opens presents. We'll have the cocoa ready." Mrs. Patterson resumed her knitting, the needles clicking in a soothing rhythm. "Merry Christmas, Daniel." "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Patterson." The drive to the warehouse took 25 minutes through light traffic. Daniel's Honda complained the entire way, that grinding noise getting worse with every gear shift. He made a mental note to call the mechanic after the holidays, to somehow find money that didn't exist for repairs that couldn't wait much longer. The warehouse sat on the industrial edge of the city, a massive concrete box surrounded by chain-link fence and security lights that turned everything harsh and shadowless. Daniel parked in the employee lot, grabbed his time card from the glove box, and headed for the entrance. Other workers were arriving for the night shift, men and women who looked as tired as Daniel felt, people working while the rest of the world slept because someone had to keep the supply chain moving. He clocked in at 9:58, 2 minutes early. His supervisor, a thick-necked man named Gary who seemed to take personal pleasure in making everyone's job harder, was waiting by the loading dock. "Foster. Good. You're on unloading tonight. We've got 3 trucks coming in, need them cleared by 4 a.m. Daniel nodded, too tired to argue or negotiate. Unloading was the worst job, pure physical labor, lifting and carrying boxes for hours until your back screamed and your hands went numb. But it paid the same as everything else, minimum wage plus a quarter, so complaining was pointless. The first truck arrived at 10:15, backing up to the dock with a beeping that echoed through the cavernous space. Daniel and 2 other workers, men whose names he'd never quite learned, began the process of emptying it. Box after box, some light, some heavy enough to make his knees buckle. Christmas merchandise that had to be processed and shipped out to stores for post-holiday sales. Televisions and toys and kitchen appliances, luxury items for people who could afford luxury. Daniel's mind drifted as his body worked. He thought about Lily asleep in her bed, about Mrs. Patterson knitting on the couch, about Jessica in whatever nice house she probably lived in now with Richard. He thought about the moment in the mall when Lily had said those 2 words, "Merry Christmas, Mommy," and how Jessica's face had crumbled for just a second before the professional mask slid back into place. What was she thinking now? Was she thinking about Lily at all? Or had she compartmentalized the encounter, filed it away as an unfortunate but manageable incident, something to discuss with her therapist before moving on with her improved life? The anger surprised him, sharp and hot. Daniel had spent 18 months working through his feelings about Jessica, had made peace with being abandoned, had accepted that some people were just built wrong for commitment and sacrifice. But seeing her today, seeing her in expensive clothes with her successful boyfriend, seeing her look at their daughter like Lily was an inconvenience, had ripped open wounds Daniel thought had scarred over. A box slipped from his hands, crashing to the concrete floor. The contents, some kind of glassware, made a shattering sound that echoed through the warehouse. Gary appeared immediately, face red with anger. "What the hell, Foster? That's coming out of your paycheck." Daniel stared at the broken box, at the sparkle of glass shards visible through cardboard. "Sorry. My hand slipped." "Your hand slipped? Be more careful. This isn't a charity, we can't afford careless workers." The irony of being called careless by a man who sat in an office while other people did back-breaking labor wasn't lost on Daniel, but he swallowed the retort that wanted to escape. He needed this job. Needed the paycheck, meager as it was. Needed the health insurance that barely covered anything but was better than nothing. Needed the structure and routine that kept him from falling apart completely. "Won't happen again," Daniel said. "See that it doesn't." Gary stalked away, clipboard in hand, probably making a note in whatever file he kept on employees who made mistakes. The other workers gave Daniel sympathetic looks but said nothing. Speaking up meant becoming a target, and everyone here was too close to the edge to risk it. They went back to unloading, the rhythm re-established, boxes moving from truck to warehouse in an endless mechanical dance. Hours passed. One truck emptied, then another. The break room coffee was bitter and burnt, but Daniel drank it anyway, needing the caffeine to push through the exhaustion settling into his bones. He checked his phone during his 15-minute break, saw no messages from Mrs. Patterson, which meant Lily was still sleeping peacefully. That was something. That was enough. The third truck was the worst, packed floor to ceiling with boxes that seemed designed to be awkward, too big or too heavy or shaped wrong for easy carrying. Daniel's back began to scream in protest around hour 6, that familiar lower back pain that he knew from experience would last for days. He'd learned to work through pain, to ignore his body's protests, to push past reasonable limits because stopping wasn't an option. By 3:30 in the morning, the truck was finally empty. Daniel's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. His hands were covered in small cuts and bruises from boxes with sharp edges. His legs trembled with fatigue. Gary appeared one last time, checking his clipboard, then nodded curtly. "Good work. You're clear to go. Merry Christmas." The words sounded hollow, perfunctory, the kind of thing you said because social convention demanded it. Daniel didn't bother responding. He clocked out, the time card stamping 4:03 a.m., and walked to his car on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The drive home was dangerous, Daniel fighting to keep his eyes open, occasionally slapping his own face to stay alert. The city was quiet at this hour, the space between night and morning when everything felt suspended and unreal. Street lights painted the road in pools of yellow-orange. A few other cars drifted past, probably other night shift workers heading home, all of them inhabitants of this strange parallel world that existed while normal people slept. Daniel's apartment building looked different at 4:30 in the morning, somehow more desolate. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step requiring concentration, and let himself in as quietly as possible. Mrs. Patterson was asleep on the couch, her knitting in her lap, the television playing some old movie on mute. He gently touched her shoulder and she woke immediately, alert in the way of elderly people who sleep lightly. "You're back," she whispered. "How is it?" "Long. Thank you for staying." "Any time, dear." She gathered her things, moving stiffly from the couch. Lily didn't wake. Slept straight through. "Good. That's good." Daniel walked her to the door, waited until she was safely inside her own apartment before closing and locking his. The silence of the apartment wrapped around him like a blanket. He stood in the dark living room, too tired to move, feeling the weight of the day settle into every muscle and bone. Christmas Eve had become Christmas morning while he was lifting boxes. His daughter would wake in a few hours, excited about presents and the magic of the holiday, and Daniel would have to summon energy he didn't have to make it special for her. He checked on Lily one more time, opening her door carefully. She was exactly as he'd left her, curled on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek. The dragon book lay on her nightstand, bookmark carefully placed. Daniel watched her breathe, counting each inhalation like a prayer of gratitude. She was healthy. She was safe. She was loved. Everything else was just details. Daniel collapsed into his own bed without bothering to shower, too exhausted to care about being clean. His alarm was set for 7:30, which would give him 3 hours of something resembling sleep. Not enough, but it would have to be. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow he would smile and be present and make Lily feel like the most important person in the world, because she was. Tomorrow he would forget about Jessica and Richard and expensive coats and the chasm between the life he had and the life his daughter deserved. But right now, in the dark quiet of Christmas morning, Daniel let himself feel every ounce of exhaustion, frustration, and bone-deep weariness that came from trying to be enough when enough seemed impossible to achieve. He closed his eyes and fell into sleep like falling into deep water, hoping that when he surfaced, he'd have the strength to face another day. The alarm pierced through Daniel's sleep like a knife, dragging him back to consciousness from dreams he couldn't remember. 7:30. Christmas morning. His body protested every movement as he forced himself upright, muscles stiff and aching from the night's work. 3 hours of sleep hadn't been nearly enough, but it was what he had. He rubbed his face, feeling the stubble rough under his palms, and swung his legs out of bed. The apartment was cold. The space heater had shut off automatically during the night, its timer doing exactly what it was supposed to do, conserving electricity they couldn't afford to waste. Daniel stumbled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at his reflection in the mirror above the sink. He looked old. Older than 32. The dark circles under his eyes had become permanent fixtures, the lines around his mouth deeper than they should be. Gray hairs were starting to appear at his temples, stress painting him silver before his time. He brushed his teeth, ran his fingers through his hair in lieu of actually styling it, and pulled on clean clothes. Christmas morning required at least the appearance of having it together, even if the reality was held together with duct tape and desperate hope. His back twinged as he bent to tie his shoes, that lower vertebrae reminding him of every box he'd lifted, every hour he'd worked standing. Lily's door was still closed, which meant she was either still asleep or awake but waiting for permission to emerge. Daniel knew his daughter's patterns, knew she'd lie in bed watching the light change under her door, listening for sounds of her father moving around, holding her excitement in check until the designated moment. She was considerate that way, thoughtful beyond her years, always aware of not being a burden. Daniel went to the kitchen and started coffee brewing in the ancient machine that sputtered and hissed like it was personally offended by having to work. While it dripped, he pulled out the ingredients for pancakes. Flour, eggs, milk that was getting close to its expiration date but still smelled fine. Sugar. Baking powder. No vanilla extract because that cost money, but the pancakes would be good anyway. He'd learned to make them fluffy, learned the right temperature for the griddle, learned all the small domestic skills that Jessica used to handle. The coffee finished brewing and Daniel poured himself a cup, black because they were out of creamer. The first sip was bitter but welcome, caffeine beginning its slow work of making him feel almost human. He mixed the pancake batter, whisking until the lumps disappeared, then heated the griddle that had been a wedding gift from someone whose name he couldn't remember anymore. The first pancake always came out wrong, too thick or too thin or cooked unevenly. Daniel flipped it onto a plate for himself, then poured 3 more circles of batter for Lily. These he watched carefully, waiting for the bubbles to form on the surface before flipping them, getting that perfect golden brown that made them look like something from a commercial. Presentation mattered. Making things feel special mattered, especially on Christmas morning when special was all he could really afford to give. By 8 o'clock, he had a stack of pancakes staying warm in the oven, bacon sizzling in the pan, and orange juice poured into the 2 glasses they owned that didn't have chips in the rim. The apartment smelled like breakfast and coffee and the faint scent of pine from the small artificial tree Daniel had set up in the corner of the living room. The tree was old, probably older than Lily, with branches that didn't quite attach properly and lights that only worked if you jiggled the cord. But it was a tree, and it had presents underneath it, and that's what mattered. Daniel walked to Lily's door and knocked softly. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. You awake?" The door flew open immediately. Lily stood there in her pajamas, hair wild from sleep, eyes bright with the particular excitement that only Christmas morning could generate. "Is it time? Can we do presents?" "After breakfast," Daniel said, and watched her face fall slightly before recovering. She was so good at hiding disappointment, so practiced at accepting whatever timeline was offered. "But come on, let's eat. I made your favorite." They ate at the small table, pancakes drowning in the cheap syrup that was mostly corn syrup and artificial flavoring but tasted like happiness when you were 7 years old. Lily swung her legs as she ate, humming between bites, radiating joy that Daniel absorbed like sunlight. This was what he worked for. These moments. This pure, uncomplicated happiness that his daughter deserved to feel every single day. "These are really good, Daddy," Lily said, syrup coating her lips. "Better than restaurant pancakes." Daniel doubted that was true, but he appreciated the sentiment. "Thanks, baby. Glad you like them. Are we going to Grandma's house today?" Lily asked, then caught herself. "Oh. Right. Sorry." Daniel's mother had passed away 2 years ago, 3 months before Jessica left. Cancer, fast and brutal, taking her from diagnosis to death in less than 6 months. She'd been his support system, his backup, the person who watched Lily when Daniel worked overtime or when Jessica needed a break. Losing her had been like losing his foundation, and everything had crumbled shortly after. He sometimes wondered if Jessica would have stayed if his mother had lived, if that extra support would have made the difference. Probably not. Some people were just meant to leave. "It's okay," Daniel said gently. "I know it's hard to remember." "I miss her," Lily said quietly. "She made really good cookies." "She did. The best." Daniel's throat tightened. His mother would have been devastated to know Jessica had left, to see her granddaughter growing up without a mother, to watch Daniel struggle alone. But maybe it was a mercy she didn't have to witness it, didn't have to see how everything she'd worked to build had fallen apart. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, the kind that came from being each other's whole world. Daniel cleared the dishes, leaving them in the sink to deal with later, and turned to face his daughter. "Ready for presents?" Lily's face transformed, exhaustion and sadness replaced by pure anticipation. She raced to the living room, dropping to her knees in front of the small tree. There were 5 packages under it, all wrapped in newspaper comics. Daniel had tried to make them festive, had tied them with string and drawn Christmas trees on the paper with marker, but they still looked like exactly what they were. Poverty wrapped in good intentions. If Lily noticed or cared, she didn't show it. She picked up each package carefully, reading the tags Daniel had written in his messy handwriting. "To Lily, from Santa. To Lily, love Daddy. To the best daughter in the world, you know who. Can I open this one first?" She held up the biggest package, the one Daniel knew was the bicycle. "Go ahead." Lily tore into the wrapping with abandon, newspaper shredding away to reveal the pink bicycle underneath. Her gasp was everything Daniel had hoped for, pure surprise and delight. "A bike. A real bike." "You mentioned wanting one," Daniel said, his exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the face of his daughter's joy. "It's used, and I repainted it, so if the color's not quite right, it's perfect." Lily ran her hands over the frame, the handlebars, the seat. "It's the most perfect bike ever." She threw her arms around Daniel's neck, squeezing tight enough to hurt, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of syrup. This was worth it. Every sleepless night, every aching muscle, every moment of wondering if he was failing as a parent. This right here made all of it worthwhile. The other presents were opened with similar enthusiasm. The puzzle featuring horses, which Lily loved. The colored pencils and sketchbook, which she immediately wanted to start using. A stuffed elephant that Daniel had found at a thrift store, gently used but clean and soft. And finally, a small package that contained a bracelet Daniel had made himself from embroidery thread, braiding it in Lily's favorite colors of purple and teal. "You made this?" Lily asked, holding the bracelet up to examine it. "Yeah. It's not professional or anything, but I love it." She slipped it onto her wrist immediately, next to the yarn bracelet she already wore. "I'm going to wear it every day." Daniel felt something in his chest expand, warm and bright. He'd worried the homemade gift would seem cheap, would highlight what he couldn't afford to buy. But Lily saw it as he'd intended it, as love made tangible, as proof that her father thought about her even when he was exhausted and overwhelmed. They spent the next hour on the floor, Lily drawing in her new sketchbook while Daniel started the puzzle. The television played a Christmas movie on cable, volume low, more background noise than active entertainment. The space heater hummed, pushing warmth into the small room. Outside, the day was gray and cold, snow starting to fall in lazy flakes that wouldn't amount to much but looked pretty against the winter sky. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, expecting a text from Mrs. Patterson or maybe a notice about his work schedule. But the name on the screen made his stomach drop. Jessica. The message was short, almost businesslike. "Hi Daniel. I've been thinking about yesterday. Would it be possible to see Lily today? I know it's Christmas, but I'd really like to spend some time with her. Let me know." Daniel read the message 3 times, each word feeling heavier than the last. Part of him wanted to respond immediately, to say yes because Lily deserved to see her mother, because Hope deserved a chance, because maybe Jessica actually meant it this time. But another part of him, the part that had spent 18 months watching his daughter cry herself to sleep, the part that had picked up the pieces every time Jessica's promises dissolved, that part wanted to throw his phone across the room and pretend the message had never arrived. "Daddy? What's wrong?" Lily had looked up from her drawing, sensing the shift in her father's mood. Daniel forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just a text from work." The lie tasted wrong in his mouth. He tried not to lie to Lily, tried to be honest in age-appropriate ways. But this felt too complicated, too loaded with potential disappointment. He needed time to think, to decide what the right response was, to protect his daughter from another possible heartbreak. "Do you have to go to work?" Lily's voice was small, worried. "No. Not today. I'm all yours." Daniel pocketed his phone, pushing the decision away for later. "What are you drawing?" Lily held up her sketchbook, showing a picture of a house with a Christmas tree in the window and 2 stick figures holding hands. "It's us. In our apartment. On Christmas." The drawing was simple, the kind of art that only a parent could truly appreciate. But something about it made Daniel's throat tight. 2 figures. Just 2. No mother in the picture, no third person completing the family. Just a father and daughter, holding hands against the world. "It's beautiful," Daniel said, and meant it. "You're really talented, Lil." They returned to their separate activities, Daniel working on the puzzle's edges while Lily continued drawing. The snow outside picked up, fat flakes now, coating the parking lot and the cars and the sad little bushes that struggled to grow in the building's landscaping. The Christmas movie ended and another began, something animated with talking snowmen and life lessons about the true meaning of the holiday. Daniel's phone buzzed again. Another message from Jessica. "I know this is last minute. But Richard is out of town for work and I'm alone and I'd really like to see my daughter on Christmas. Please. My daughter." As if 18 months of absence hadn't happened. As if she had any right to claim possession of a child she'd abandoned. Daniel's jaw clenched, anger rising hot and fast. But beneath the anger was something else, something that looked uncomfortably like sympathy. Jessica was alone on Christmas. She'd built this new life, chased this better version of herself, and ended up alone anyway. Good, the petty part of him thought. Let her feel what Lily felt. Let her understand what it's like to be abandoned. But the better part of him, the part that was trying to raise a daughter who believed in kindness and second chances, that part couldn't quite embrace the cruelty. He thought about those 2 words Lily had said in the mall. "Merry Christmas, Mommy." Said with such hope, such forgiveness, such willingness to accept love in whatever form it came. Daniel stood, walking to the kitchen where Lily couldn't hear him. He called Jessica, not wanting this conversation to happen over text where tone could be misread and intentions could be unclear. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel." "Hi." "Hi." He kept his voice low, neutral. "I got your messages. I meant what I said yesterday. About wanting to see Lily more. And I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, I know that. But it's Christmas and I just..." Her voice cracked slightly. "I miss her. I miss my daughter." "You could have seen her any time in the last year and a half," Daniel said, the words coming out harder than he'd intended. "You could have called. Visited. Done literally anything to show her you cared. But you didn't. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about this sudden maternal instinct." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "You're right. You're absolutely right. I have no excuse. I was selfish and scared and I handled everything wrong. But I'm trying to do better now. I'm trying to fix it. You can't fix 18 months in one afternoon, Jessica. I know. But I have to start somewhere." A pause. "Please, Daniel. Let me see her. Even just for an hour. I'll come to you, wherever you want. I just want to see my little girl on Christmas." Daniel closed his eyes, exhaustion and frustration and something like grief washing over him. He thought about Lily's face at the mall, the desperate hope when she'd seen her mother. He thought about the drawing she'd just made, 2 figures instead of 3. He thought about how many times she'd asked when Mommy was coming back, how many nights she'd cried, how many ways she'd tried to be good enough to make her mother return. And he thought about those 2 words. "Merry Christmas, Mommy." The power they'd had to stop Jessica in her tracks, to crack through whatever armor she'd built around her heart. Maybe people could change. Maybe second chances mattered. Maybe protecting Lily meant allowing her the possibility of having a mother again, even if that mother had proven herself unreliable. Or maybe he was just too tired to fight anymore. 1 hour, Daniel said finally. "You can come here at noon. 1 hour, Jessica. And if you're late, or if you cancel, or if you do anything to hurt her again, that's it. You don't get another chance. I understand. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. I'll be there at noon exactly. I promise. Your promises don't mean much to me anymore. But they still mean something to Lily. So for her sake, keep this one." He hung up before Jessica could respond, before she could hear the tremor in his voice that might have been anger or sadness or just bone-deep weariness. He stood in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at nothing, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake. When he returned to the living room, Lily looked up expectantly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah. That was your mom. She wants to come visit for a little while today." The change in Lily's expression was immediate and profound. Hope bloomed across her face like sunrise, bright and impossible to hide. "Really? Mom's coming here? At noon? Just for an hour?" Daniel sat back down on the floor, reaching for another puzzle piece. "But Lily, I need you to understand something. Your mom has made promises before that she didn't keep. So if she doesn't show up, or if she has to leave early, I need you to know that's not your fault. Okay?" Lily nodded seriously, but the hope remained undimmed in her eyes. "She'll come. I know she will." Daniel wasn't nearly as confident, but he kept that to himself. Instead, he pulled Lily close, kissing the top of her head. "Want to help me finish this puzzle before she gets here?" They worked together, finding pieces that fit, building something whole from fragments. The clock on the wall ticked toward noon, each minute feeling longer than the last. Lily kept glancing at the door, then at the clock, then back to the door. Her excitement was palpable, filling the small apartment with an energy that was exhausting to be around because Daniel knew how easily it could transform into crushing disappointment. 11:30 came and went. 11:45. Daniel started to prepare himself for the conversation he'd have to have when Jessica didn't show. Started planning how to comfort Lily, how to explain that sometimes adults failed, how to pick up the pieces of his daughter's heart one more time. At 11:58, there was a knock at the door. Daniel's head snapped up. Lily was already moving, scrambling to her feet, racing toward the door. "She's here. Daddy, she's here." "Wait," Daniel said, standing quickly. "Let me answer it first." He moved past Lily, putting himself between his daughter and whoever was on the other side of the door. It was probably Jessica. Probably. But 18 months of being the only parent had made him cautious, protective in ways he hadn't been before. He checked the peephole, saw Jessica standing in the hallway, and felt something in his chest unclench slightly. She'd actually come. Daniel opened the door. Jessica stood there in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, her makeup minimal. She looked nervous, vulnerable, nothing like the polished woman from the mall. In her hands she held a gift bag, something brightly colored with tissue paper sprouting from the top. "Hi," she said softly. "I hope I'm not too early." "You're right on time." Daniel stepped back, letting her enter. "Come in." Jessica walked into the apartment, her eyes sweeping over the space with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Was she judging the shabby furniture, the peeling linoleum, the obvious markers of poverty? Or was she remembering the life she'd left behind, the small space they'd shared when they were young and struggling together? Then Lily appeared, shy suddenly, standing a few feet away like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to approach. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, baby." Jessica's voice cracked on the word. She set down the gift bag and opened her arms. "Can I have a hug?" Lily launched herself forward, crashing into her mother with the full force of 18 months of missing and hoping and waiting. Jessica caught her, stumbling slightly from the impact, and wrapped her arms around her daughter. They stood there in the small living room, holding each other, and Daniel watched something shift in Jessica's face. The professional mask crumbled completely, replaced by raw emotion that looked like grief and love tangled together. Jessica was crying. Actual tears streaming down her face, her shoulders shaking with the force of whatever was breaking loose inside her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into Lily's hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mommy made some really big mistakes." Lily pulled back slightly, looking up at her mother with those big, serious eyes. "It's okay. You're here now. It's not okay. But I'm going to try to make it better." Jessica wiped her eyes, trying to pull herself together. She glanced at Daniel, something like shame flickering across her face. "Thank you for letting me come." Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The anger he'd carried for 18 months felt suddenly complicated, mixed with other things he didn't want to examine too closely. This was the woman who'd left him, who'd abandoned their daughter, who'd chosen a better life over the family she'd built. But she was also the woman who was crying in his living room, who'd actually shown up when he'd expected her to fail, who was looking at Lily like she'd finally realized what she'd thrown away. People were complicated. Pain was complicated. Second chances were the most complicated thing of all. "Do you want some coffee?" Daniel heard himself ask. "It's not great, but it's hot." Jessica smiled weakly. "That sounds perfect." They sat in the living room, Jessica on the sagging couch with Lily pressed against her side, Daniel in the single chair across from them nursing his third cup of coffee. The initial awkwardness had faded into something more natural, conversation flowing between mother and daughter like water finding its old channels. Jessica asked about school, about friends, about the dragon book sitting on the coffee table. Lily answered with growing confidence, her earlier shyness evaporating in the warmth of her mother's attention. Daniel watched them together, seeing the resemblance he tried to ignore for 18 months. The same laugh, the same way of tilting their heads when thinking. Lily was animated in a way he rarely saw anymore, gesturing wildly as she told her mother about the school play and her art teacher and the best friend who'd moved away last summer. Jessica listened with what appeared to be genuine interest, asking follow-up questions, commenting appropriately, being present in a way she hadn't been for so long. The gift bag sat between them, still unopened. Jessica had insisted Lily finish telling her stories first, and Daniel respected that choice even as he wondered what was inside. Something expensive, probably. Something that would highlight the difference between what Jessica could provide and what Daniel managed on his warehouse salary. Finally, Jessica picked up the bag and handed it to Lily. "I got you something. I hope you like it." Lily pulled out the tissue paper carefully, revealing a box underneath. Inside was a professional art set, the kind with dozens of colored pencils in a wooden case, brushes, watercolors, everything a young artist could want. It must have cost over $100, maybe more. Lily gasped, running her fingers over the supplies with reverence. "This is amazing," she breathed. "Thank you, Mom. I remembered you always loved drawing," Jessica said softly. "I wanted you to have good supplies." Daniel felt something twist in his chest. He'd given Lily colored pencils too, the cheap kind from the drugstore that cost $5. They sat on the floor by her sketchbook, suddenly looking pathetic next to this professional set. But Lily didn't seem to notice the comparison. She hugged her mother again, thanking her repeatedly, and Daniel forced himself to be grateful that his daughter had one more thing that made her happy. The hour Daniel had promised stretched into 2, then 3. Jessica showed no signs of leaving, and Lily clearly didn't want her to go. They moved to the small table where Lily demonstrated her new art supplies, drawing pictures while Jessica praised every line and color choice. Daniel made sandwiches for lunch, simple peanut butter and jelly, and Jessica ate hers without complaint even though he suspected she normally ate at restaurants where sandwiches came with fancy names and presentation. Around 3 o'clock, Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something changed in her expression. She looked at Daniel, then at Lily, then back at her phone. "I should probably go," she said quietly. "I promised I'd only stay an hour, and I've been here much longer." Lily's face fell. "Do you have to?" "I do, baby. But I'll come back. I promise. We can do this again, maybe next weekend like I mentioned yesterday." "Really?" Lily's hope was painful to witness, so raw and desperate. "Really?" Jessica pulled out her phone, opening her calendar. "How about Saturday? I could pick you up, take you to lunch somewhere nice, maybe that place with the ice cream sundaes you used to love?" Lily looked at Daniel for permission, her eyes pleading. He wanted to say no, wanted to protect her from the possibility of another broken promise. But he also saw something in Jessica's face that hadn't been there yesterday at the mall. Something that looked like genuine commitment, like the beginning of understanding what she'd lost. "Saturday works," Daniel said. "But Jessica, if something comes up and you can't make it, you call ahead. You don't just not show up. Understood?" "Understood." Jessica stood, gathering her purse and coat. She knelt down to Lily's level, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "I love you, sweetheart. I know I haven't been good at showing it, but I do. And I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the mom you deserve. I love you too, Mom." Lily threw her arms around Jessica's neck one more time, holding tight. Daniel walked Jessica to the door while Lily stayed in the living room with her new art set. Jessica paused at the threshold, looking back at the small apartment with an expression Daniel couldn't quite interpret. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For letting me come. For not turning me away. I know you had every right to." "I didn't do it for you," Daniel replied, keeping his voice low. "I did it for Lily. She deserves to have a mother who shows up." "You're right." Jessica met his eyes, and he saw something there he hadn't seen in years. Humility, maybe. Or regret. "I saw Richard this morning before he left for his trip. We had a long talk about yesterday, about running into you and Lily at the mall. About what she said. 'Merry Christmas, Mommy,'" Daniel said softly. Those 2 words. Jessica's eyes filled with tears again. "I couldn't stop thinking about them. About how simple they were, how much hope was in them. How much I didn't deserve that hope. Richard asked me what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years, and I realized I'd been so focused on what I didn't want that I'd forgotten to think about what actually mattered. And what does matter? Daniel asked, genuine curiosity overriding his bitterness. Her. Jessica's voice broke slightly. Lily matters. Being her mother matters. I thought I wanted freedom and nice things and a life without struggle. But sitting with her today, listening to her talk about school and her friends and her drawings, I realized I threw away the only thing that was ever really mine. The only thing that ever really made me happy. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to tell her it was too late, that you couldn't just waltz back in after 18 months and expect everything to be fine. But another part of him, the part that had loved her once, that had built a life with her, that part recognized the woman he'd married in the person standing before him now. Don't make promises you can't keep, he said finally. Lily's had enough disappointment. If you're going to do this, if you're going to be in her life again, you have to actually commit. No more disappearing when things get hard or when your new life gets busy. I know. I will. I am committed. Jessica wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. And Daniel? I'm sorry. For leaving, for everything. You deserved better than what I gave you. Yeah, Daniel agreed. I did. But that's in the past now. What matters is what happens next. Jessica nodded, then leaned forward and kissed his cheek gently. Not romantic, just grateful. Merry Christmas, Daniel. Merry Christmas, Jessica. She left, her footsteps echoing in the hallway, and Daniel closed the door behind her. He stood there for a moment, processing everything that had just happened, trying to figure out what he felt. Relief that Jessica had actually shown up. Anger that it had taken 18 months and a chance encounter. Hope that maybe, possibly, things could get better for Lily. Fear that they'd just be hurt again. He returned to the living room where Lily was drawing with her new supplies, completely absorbed in creating something colorful and chaotic. She looked up when he entered, her smile bright enough to power the whole building. Did you have a good Christmas, Daddy? Daniel settled beside her, looking at the drawing taking shape under her hands. It was another house, another Christmas tree, but this time there were 3 figures. Still stick people, still simple, but 3 instead of 2. Yeah, sweetheart, he said, pulling her close. I had a really good Christmas. Did you? The best. Lily leaned against him, her small body warm and solid and real. Mom's really coming back on Saturday? She said she would. Daniel chose his words carefully. And I hope she does. But Lily, whatever happens, whatever any adult does or doesn't do, you need to remember that you are loved. I love you more than anything in this world. That never changes. I know, Daddy. Lily returned to her drawing, adding details with careful concentration. You're my hero. The words hit Daniel somewhere deep, unexpected tears pricking at his eyes. He thought about the photo on Clara Whitmore's laptop in that other story, the one he'd never lived but somehow felt connected to. A daughter calling her father a hero. The greatest gift any child could give. Daniel Foster wasn't a CEO. He wasn't rich or successful by any conventional measure. He drove a car that sounded like it was dying, worked a job that destroyed his body, lived in an apartment with thin walls and broken appliances. But sitting there with his daughter on Christmas afternoon, watching her create art with supplies from the mother who'd finally shown up, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in 18 months. Hope. Maybe Jessica would keep her promises this time. Maybe those 2 words Lily had spoken in the mall really had changed something fundamental. Maybe second chances actually worked sometimes. Or maybe they'd be disappointed again, and Daniel would have to pick up the pieces one more time. But right now, in this moment, they were okay. More than okay. They were together, they were loved, and they had hope. And sometimes, Daniel thought, that was enough. That was everything. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, making everything clean and new. Inside the small apartment, a father and daughter sat together, building a life from whatever pieces they had, proving that family wasn't about money or status or perfect circumstances. It was about showing up. It was about staying. It was about 2 words spoken with pure love on Christmas Eve that reminded everyone listening what actually mattered. Merry Christmas, Mommy. 2 words that changed everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.